introduce our next speaker. She's a colleague and a friend, and I haven't seen her in person for years, and it's a real delight to see her here today. I like to call her the queen of person-centered care because she really just does such a great job, and I know you're going to enjoy Sonya Barsness.
Thank you. Well, that's a funny intro. Hello, everybody. I'm just so thrilled to be here, and yeah, of course, to see Alan in person, and also to be presenting here with my partner in crime and fellow disruptor, Paul Arovich, because I also hail from that part of Virginia. I live in Norfolk. So I will start by telling you just a little bit about me, just for context of where this is all coming from and what I'm going to talk to you about. So I'm a gerontologist. So as you'll see, we have an identity crisis as gerontologists. It's very serious. Nobody knows what we do. So typically when I go around and I tell people I'm a gerontologist, but through no fault of their own, they assume I'm a physician. I'm not a physician. So gerontology is actually the non-medical study of aging and growing older. So I like to say we're like the more fun part of aging. We're like the life part, the whole, like we're all aging, right? So I'm this non-medical side. I have my own consulting business, and my work is about helping people with dementia to live well and supporting those who support people with dementia to help them to support people in the most person-centered way. So I do lots of different things, and I have flyers up there that give some examples of some of the stuff I do. I have a blog, Being Heard, and I call myself a revisionary gerontologist. I made up the word, not gerontologist, but revisionary, because I like to think we need to change the way we think about aging. We need to change the way that we think about dementia, and so that's what my work is very much about. And I teach at Georgetown University in the Masters in Aging and Health program. I teach the psychology of aging, and I teach at Virginia Commonwealth University, and I teach a class on dementia. So I'm kind of in lots of different places, and so you'll kind of hear that in my perspective. So, okay, before we get started. So this is going to be a little bit of a different perspective about dementia, and what I ask is that this is not intended to be a criticism of any of us, of any of the people we work with. This is really just a different way of looking at things, and I really do believe that this is important because the approach that I'm going to talk about actually enables us to be our best selves, as care partners, as people that support people with dementia. And it allows us to focus on the best parts of ourselves to help people with dementia. So why do we have to change our behavior? Why do we have to change our behavior? Well, I think this came to me several years ago with my colleague Karen Stobie, when we started realizing that a lot of times when we would talk about dementia with different groups, a lot of times people were talking about how we had to change the person with dementia. We have to manage them. We have to keep them from doing these things that we don't want them to do. We have to make them be different. And we see it because this is one of the reasons why we have antipsychotic medications for people with dementia. It's because it's one of our ways of us trying to change the behavior of the person with dementia. And of course, there are times when we want to change the behavior of people with dementia because they're doing things that we may not like, that might be upsetting, that might be even dangerous. But I feel like sometimes we don't talk about this whole story, right? Which is, how do we change our behavior? It's not really fair to ask people with dementia to change their behavior because they really can't in many cases. And the way they're acting, as we'll kind of talk about, is their way of expressing something to us. So we can't really always ask them to change. So we have to be the ones to change. And there's that saying, like, you can't change other people's behaviors, but you can control your own behavior. That's kind of what we're talking about today. It's like, what can we do to change things so that life can be better for people with dementia? So this is kind of like, there are many parts of this idea of changing our behavior. So I know it's a small print, I could not get it to be bigger, so I'm just going to read it to you. So we always have to start from the perspective of the person living with dementia and try to understand where they're coming from. We have to change our view of dementia and people living with dementia. We have to move to a person-centered view of dementia. And we have to be curious about why people with dementia are acting the way they are, what's happening, what are they trying to tell us. And then we can find ways that we can respond, that we can change our behavior to kind of meet where they are. So we're gonna talk about all these different things. Oops, keep doing it the wrong way. So I know Dr. Arovich covered a lot of these details about dementia, but I'm just gonna talk about this to make kind of a primary point, is that, as Dr. Arovich said, dementia is not a disease itself, right? It's a group of cognitive challenges. And it's enough that it's severe enough to affect a person's daily existence. And so also, as Dr. Arovich pointed out, it's not just memory. There's many different parts of dementia actually that cause a person to really be challenged every single day in everything they do. So how many of you have had days where you're super tired, or you're sick, or something's on your mind, or you're taking medications and your brain is not working? I mean, we've all had that experience, right? So we can sort of understand what it might be like in a little bit to live with dementia, because we all can understand when your brain is just not working the way that you like it to work, and how not only does that make it difficult to live, but it maybe makes you frustrated or angry or lash out at people, right? So there are many different things that are happening in the brain of a person with dementia that actually are making their daily life very, very difficult. And this helps us to understand where they're coming from so that we can then try to figure out what they are trying to say to us. So this is one of my favorite definitions of dementia. It's a shift in the way a person experiences the world around them. So this is not a medical definition. This is an experiential, person-centered definition. We're looking at the person, we're trying to understand where they're coming from, and we're recognizing that their world is different in their eyes. So let's start with the perspective of people with dementia and just kind of learn a little bit. So a lot of my career, so I've been working with people with dementia for over 30 years, and I've had a lot of privilege in being able to sit with people who are living with dementia, especially people in the earlier experiences of dementia that can tell me what it's like. They can tell me what it's like to live with dementia. And I've learned a tremendous amount. I'm going to share some things I've learned. So this is a quote from a person living with dementia named Richard Taylor. He's actually a pretty famous person with dementia. He wrote a book and he used to go talking all over the country. And this is just, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but just a couple of things that to point out here is that Richard would try to help us understand that his brain is just different. It's not wrong or bad, it's just different. And he's still a human being with the same needs as every one of us in this room. This is from a gentleman who was in one of my early stage support groups. And he would talk about, it was amazing to him that as soon as he was diagnosed with dementia, how quickly people started making decisions for him. And that he felt like, no one's even asking me what I want or what's important to me. All of a sudden, people are just asking now, telling me now what I should be doing. This is another quote from Richard Taylor, and just to highlight a couple of things, because I think this is such an important point. What he's saying is that when your brain is not working the same, and when it's difficult for you to do things, he sees in people's eyes how they react to that. And he starts to pull into himself, because he sees the way people are seeing him now. They're seeing him differently. And it's not in a positive way. And so as you pull into yourself, you start to think, I don't have a value for myself. I'm not valuable to this person anymore. I'm not valuable to society anymore. And you can imagine what that does to a person, of course. If they're feeling like they're not being seen, if they feel like they're kind of only being seen for their deficits, that clearly can make all of us quite upset. Christine Bryden talks about what it's like to have these catastrophic reactions, as we call. She says her stress tolerance is just so low, there's only so much she can handle. And so she just has these kind of outbursts that sometimes she can't really control. And just other things that I've heard from people with dementia about what they want us to know about what it's like to live with dementia. So to point out that, and again, this is not meant to make us feel bad, as human beings, but many people with dementia have said that the most disabling part of living with dementia is not necessarily just their functional impairment, but it's actually how they feel people see and treat them. And that this makes them feel like that they are no longer a person sometimes. They're kind of invisible. And so this is where our behavior can come in, our behavior, right? We can change that. We have the power to do that. So how can we, enable people with dementia rather than disable them? So we have to start with how we may be disabling people. So not to start with a negative, but I think this kind of helps to understand, like, how could we be disabling people with dementia? So, all right, I'm gonna get a little academic-y on you. No, that's not a real word, but I'm a little bit in the academic world. Not entirely. I like to think of myself as a little bit of a disruptor, but my experience has actually been that there's a lot of stuff in the academic and research world that people that are not in that world have no access to, like no access to whatsoever. And there's so much research and good information out there, and so I want to try to bring some of these ideas to you in like plain language and ways that can possibly be helpful. So this is one of the ways in which we might disable people with dementia. So this is like a very scientific term. This is a psychology term, fundamental attribution error. And in psychology, what this means is that what we sometimes do, and this is not just with people with dementia, we have a tendency when people are acting in a certain way to attribute the way they're acting to themselves and not to all the other things around them. Not to our behaviors, not to the external factors. We tend to be like, that's just the way Margaret works, right? Meanwhile, it could be that actually there's lots of other reasons why Margaret's acting that way. So I'll just give you a couple examples, and this is from Dr. Steve Sabat's work. So here's a couple examples of what it looks like with people with dementia. So say we have Jane, who is a person living with dementia, and she gets angry with her husband, Mel. And she tells him he is awful and mean, and she throws a fork at him. Okay? Maybe some of us have seen things like this before, right? So what we might say is like, well, that's just because Jane has dementia and people with dementia throw forks, right? And that's just the way that happens. That's what people with dementia do. So fundamental attribution error would say that dementia makes people mean. So we're saying this is kind of Jane, right? Another way of looking at it is that Jane was setting the table. There's all sorts of things going on. It's very loud. He's a little bit overwhelmed. He seems withdrawn. He might even roll his eyes when people around him are talking. So fundamental attribution error would say Javier has apathy because he has Alzheimer's disease, and people with Alzheimer's have apathy, and that's just what happens, so don't worry about him, right? Well, another perspective could be that the environment is too much for Javier. There's just too much going on. It's too much stimulation. Maybe people aren't even talking to him because they're like, oh, he has trouble with words, so we're kind of just gonna work around him. So the point is, again, that we sometimes, our behavior, with good intentions or just from lack of knowing, may cause a person with dementia to act in certain ways, and then we may say that that's a part of their disease. So it could be that there are other things that are actually at stake here. Another kind of academic-y concept from Dr. Tom Kitwood, a psychologist that was one of the leaders of person-centered dementia care, talks about this idea of malignant social psychology. What that basically means is that our society tends to have these ways of acting with people with dementia that sort of can undermine their personhood. And that this is not because we're evil. It's very important. This is not because we're bad people, but this is what he calls a cultural inheritance. So I'll just say, what he means by that is, when we are only told the story of dementia that focuses on what's wrong with people and their deficits and that they're no longer there, that's what happens sometimes. Because if someone's not there, and if they really can't understand, then we can do things and we may not be thinking the person knows or pays attention, or is really fully present. So he talks about these things, and I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I just wanted to show you, he's done research. There's a lot of things that we do sometimes with people with dementia, again, not because we're evil people, but because this is what we've kind of been told, right? And so we do things like we lie to people with dementia, Sometimes we outpace them. We do things faster than they can do them because maybe we're in a rush. and they're taking too much time. And we've all been there, right? It's like you're trying to get something done, a person with dementia is doing it in their own way, taking longer, so we'll outpace them, which can cause them to get frustrated. We sometimes withhold, things from people with dementia because we don't think they're going to understand or be able to participate. Sometimes we invalidate, the things that people with dementia are saying. They might be trying to say something to us and we'll go, oh, that's not right, Mom. That's not the way it is. And so, again, not that we are trying to be evil people, but this is just what we sometimes do because of the stories that we've been told about people with dementia. But the good news is we can change this. We don't have to believe those stories. There's different ways that we can act. So I'm going to go past this here. All right. So another way that we sometimes disable people with dementia is actually by the way we describe the way they act. So we have a thing, this term, which we use in the field of dementia. It's called Behavioral and Psychological Symptoms of Dementia, BPSD. So these are examples of behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. So I would like you, if you're willing, to raise your hand and tell me if in the last week you have had one of these symptoms. Almost everyone, right? So these are not abnormal. These are not abnormal. These are normal human behaviors. But because a person has a diagnosis of dementia, we look at these differently. And we say, oh, well, a person with dementia is agitated. When actually they might just be getting legitimately angry as a normal response to a situation. So again, sometimes our behavior, and I mean our collectively, not just us in our room, right? But physicians, people in the field, we tend to then create a situation in which we are looking at a person with dementia, in which we are saying it's kind of your problem that you're irritable. It's kind of your problem that you have apathy. When it's really all of us. We're working together on this. So an example is, we sometimes use terms that label people. So we might say, this woman is a wanderer. This is a term that we use to describe people that walk a lot, right? So we use this term, and it does have a negative connotation. Has anyone ever heard this term used positively with people with dementia? Not typically, right? Typically we say the person's a wanderer, that's a very bad thing, we want to stop them from wandering, wandering is bad. But what would be the difference if we talked about it differently? If we change our behavior and we just said, she likes to walk. So there is a difference, because if we say someone's a wanderer, what are we usually trying to do? We're like stopping them, right? It's like we don't want that. And not to say that we shouldn't sometimes stop it in the sense if it's dangerous, right? We can't have someone walking out on 15. That's not gonna happen, that's not good. But if we say someone likes to walk, we change our behavior. Then we might say, well, she likes to walk, so what can I do, to support her to walk? What could I do to make sure that when she does walk, it's actually safe? What can I do so that she can meet her need, which is her need to walk? So it changes. Just by us changing our behavior, we can actually change her experience. And she's not just a wanderer. By the way, I'm a wanderer. I mean, I'm definitely going to be labeled. There's lots of things I'm going to be labeled at if I end up, in memory care, because many of these things I do. I'll probably be a hoarder. I'll be all of the terms that we use. So, why is this a problem? Well, because this thinking does allow us then to think that we have to change the person with dementia. It's a problem. So we have to change it. We have to fix them. And it doesn't allow us as much to think about what we can do, and how we can possibly impact this. And so person-centered thinking, what we're going to talk about, helps us more to think about things from the perspective of the person with dementia, helps us to be curious about them, and then helps us understand what we can do to change our behavior. And I'll just caveat this by saying, this is easier said than done. This is not simple. And for those of us that are family caregivers, this doesn't always happen the way we want. There are family dynamics, there's emotional components to this, right, as being a caregiver, and sometimes this is the ideal, doesn't always happen this way. But I offer it as a different way of thinking about this, that not only is it better for the person with dementia, but actually could be better for us. So how can we change our behavior? Let's look at a couple different things. So how can our behavior enable people with dementia? So we'll have to start with this idea of person-centered care that Dr. Erovich started talking about. And so there are many definitions, actually, of person-centered care. I like these simple definitions, which is about supporting people and living meaningfully based on what's important to them. So sometimes in the field, I feel like when we talk about person-centered care, we talk mostly about people's preferences. So we talk about, well, Sonya likes bananas, Sonya doesn't like broccoli. So-and-so likes this, but they don't like that. That's a part of person-centered care. But person-centered care is really about knowing who someone is and what's important to them and trying to support them in achieving those things. And just because someone has a diagnosis of dementia doesn't mean that they don't have needs, that they don't have these human needs that we all have. So it's always seeing things from the perspective of the person with dementia. And I would add, person-centered care is seeing things from our perspective too. And trying to understand where we're coming from, trying to understand why we're reacting in a way that we are. I've had families come to me and say, I hear what you're saying, Sonya, it's all nice. However, when I want to get my mom to take a shower and she doesn't want to take a shower, it's very hard for me to be person-centered like you're talking about. And the question I like to ask is, what is it that you are feeling so strongly about needing to give her a shower at that exact moment? Like, tell me about this. Like, what is it that you're feeling like, okay, this is the most important thing in the world right now. Tell me your perspective on this. And sometimes when you talk about it, families will say things to me like, there's so little I can do, that's something I can. That's so little that I can do, this is something that I can actually control. I can control getting her a shower. I can make sure that she's clean. That's something I have control over. And that's why I put so much weight on it, because it's something that I know I can accomplish. So we have to look at everyone's perspective, but because people with dementia, their perspective is sometimes missed, I think we really need to do a lot more work in trying to understand what they are trying to say and how they're seeing things. So these are values of person-centered care: choice, dignity, respect, self-determination, meaningful living. So again, this is, I know, a little bit on the negative side, but it's important for us to hear this. This is a research study that was done by some colleagues up in Maryland, and basically what they said is that they have found that when they study caregivers that have more of the perspective that's not person-centered, meaning like that they have to kind of manage a person, that they have to kind of control them, that it's actually very difficult for them to have a good relationship, and it's very hard for them to actually honor the person's personhood so that there can be a strong bond. So this is not good for anybody, As we know, it's like when you're trying to get someone to do something that they don't want to do, that generally is not always good for a relationship. But there's another way. We can still encourage people to do the things that they have to do, but we can actually look at it from their perspective and change the way we are approaching the situation, and that might actually also still get it done, but it's like helping the relationship, and it's more like a partnership. So just this term personhood, sometimes I know it has a lot of different meanings. What we are talking about is this idea that Dr. Kitwood said, which is kind of the idea that personhood is something that it's like a status that you bestow upon another person. So there's a relationship part of this. So you're a person because I see you as a person. You feel like you're a human being because I treat you like a human being. And so broadly, this is this idea of personhood. And so he talked a lot about this, of how do we ensure that people with dementia feel a sense of personhood? Because what do we hear from people with dementia a lot? We hear things like, I'm lost, I'm not myself, I'm afraid I'm not going to be this person anymore. So how can we ensure that people actually feel like they are still a person? So, people with dementia are just trying to make sense of their world, just like we are. So, what does this look like? Can someone tell me what this says?
Ice cream's good.
So it actually says that. So, what does this tell us? Exactly what you said. Our brain looks at it and we make sense of it, right? And we try to fill in the blanks. We do this all day, every day. You know, we look at something, we make sense of it, we fill in the blanks, we come up with a solution, even if we don't have the answer in front of us. This is exactly what people with dementia do all of the time. They take the information they have and they try to make sense of the situation. Is it accurate? Not all the time. And many times it's not accurate. But they are trying to make sense of the world. And so we have to actually pause and give credit to that, right? That's an amazing feat that the brain works that well, that we can piece things together, even when we have all those other things that are happening that are making it difficult for us to think. So people with dementia are just filling in the blanks. And so we have to always keep this in mind. So I'm going to give you a couple examples in a little bit. So the other thing that we have to do is reframe the way we think about behaviors. So typically, and for many years in the field of dementia care, we have, and I'll take responsibility to this, it happens in gerontology, it happens in medicine, we tend to think of behaviors as just problems. You know, these are just problems that we have to solve. So we have to rethink about what behaviors actually mean. So first of all, how many of you in here have behaviors? We all have behaviors, because we would not be alive. That's a part of being human. We all have behaviors. And behaviors are a form of communication. They are an expression of need. So anytime a person with dementia is acting in a certain way, we have to ask ourselves, what is happening here? What is this person telling us? What is going on? I have decided over the years to stop using the word behaviors because there's such a negative connotation. And when we talk about behaviors, lots of times the first inclination is for us to say, well, we have to stop that, we have to give medication. And I know Dr. Irvich kind of talked about this a little bit, but the use of antipsychotic medication with people with dementia is quite pervasive. And it is not, it's very problematic. It's dangerous, there's high risks. And it's actually even not suggested. So we have to find other ways of working with people with dementia. We have to find other ways of responding to them. And so I like to think of behaviors in more plain, normal language as actions and reactions. You know, it's the way people act, it's the way people react to different situations. That's what behaviors really are. So one of the ways in which we can change our behavior is that we can try to understand why. We can try to understand why a person is acting the way they are. Be curious about it. You try to understand where this person is coming from. Why are they acting this way? What made them do this? And so several years ago, my colleague Karen Stobie and I, we were actually asked by CMS, which is the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, to develop a training program for all nursing homes across the country. And we developed this kind of program or way of thinking about this in which we say it starts looking at the why. So you have to look at the why of behaviors to try to understand why a person is acting that way. So we came up with these different categories to help us understand why is a person acting that way. Helps our brain kind of think through, you know, what could be the possible reasons why a person is acting this way. So we start with things like health, medical reasons. I don't know about you, but when I don't feel well, I'm not always the nicest person in the world. In fact, my husband commented last week when I had a cold that I am actually, can be very difficult because I totally retreat into myself. I have apathy. So one of the reasons why people are acting the way they are could be because they don't feel well. There's a medical condition, there's a medication that's causing them to act in a certain way. Many different in that kind of bucket of medical and health reasons why a person could be acting the way they are. So we have to think about that. Is there something that's happening recently? Is the person's stomach hurting? You know, I've had people with dementia just simply say to me things like, my legs are on fire. My legs are on fire. And you're thinking, okay, what could this mean? Well, that could be neuropathy. You know, there could be nerve issues. A person's having pain in their legs. So it could be many reasons, and sometimes people don't have the words at all. Sometimes people will just do things. You know, they might thrash their legs around, they might even kind of kick something because they're trying to get rid of the pain. Communication. The person's communication and what they're trying to say and how they're saying it gives us a clue as to why people are acting the way they are. It's also our communication to people with dementia that can actually cause them to act in a certain way. The task. So I don't know about all of you, but I don't think I'd really like being bathed by somebody. It's just not something that I would like, you know? This is a difficult task. We have to do it sometimes. We have to help people to do things that they don't want, but this is not an easy task. People can get very embarrassed, and that does not come out again in words. You know, that might come out in different ways. Pushing someone, telling them no, shutting them out of the bathroom. Could be a reason why someone's acting the way they are. The environment. We sometimes don't pay as much attention to the environment, but if a person can't hear very well, or if there's too much happening, too much noise, just things that are very distracting, it can cause a person to act in a certain way. Unmet needs. A person has to go to the bathroom. A person's hungry. A person has a need for attention or socialization, and they're not getting that. They may, in different ways, show us. Life story. This could be a whole presentation, is who a person has been, who they are now. I'm sure all of us have different stories related to this of how something in someone's past actually caused them to act in a certain way as a person living with dementia. One of the common stories we hear sometimes, and this is true, is if someone was in the military, if they're a veteran, and for example, you're in a place where there's like loudspeakers, it could be Kmart, or Walmart, it could be a nursing home. But if you hear that voice coming out of somewhere, it can really freak you out if you were in the military. And again, you don't have words to describe that, so you might act in certain ways. People who have been nurses. I had a nurse that was living in the assisted living community I was working at, and she wanted to take care of all the other people that lived there. And she would do that in ways that sometimes not everyone was into. So this was her life story. She wasn't trying to be upsetting by going into people's rooms at night. She was trying to take their vitals. So it helps us understand, why people could be acting the way they are. And you, again, I hate, it's us sometimes. It's just simply us. Maybe someone doesn't like us. I've had that happen many times. There's something about me that just that person does not like. And sometimes we trigger things in people and they act in certain ways. So it's useful to kind of keep this in the back of our mind, because these are all things that we can then do to change our behavior. We can act differently. We can approach the person differently. We can think about the situation differently. So we are the ones that need to change our behavior. So a couple of examples of what this looks like in reality. So Maisie has been hiding her wallet, and then she accuses everyone around her of stealing it. Has anyone had a similar circumstance like this? Okay. So we have to be curious about this. Why is Maisie saying this? What is behind this? What are the reasons why she's telling everyone that she's stealing? Now again, fundamental attribution error would say people with dementia are paranoid. That may not exactly be the reason. It is true that some people with different types of dementia have paranoia. It is not true that all people with dementia have paranoia. It is not true that all people with dementia have delusions. These are terms that are used quite frequently, but they are not applicable to every situation. And because they're used so frequently, and because we have a medical model of dementia, we might look at Maisie and say, Maisie is paranoid. There could be other reasons. So, could be communication. Maisie could be telling us that she does not trust these people around her. Maybe she doesn't even know who they are. If I go back to my area over there and I can't find my wallet, I might go, I don't know these people. Who took my wallet? That's not an abnormal reaction. So she may not be trusting the people around her. She might not remember who they are, even if it's people that she knows, even if it's her family. So she's communicating a fear. She's communicating insecurity. She's communicating that she's anxious, and she's trying to make sense again. So she's filling in the blanks. So it's kind of, a human quality, right? That if we can't find something, we kind of blame it on someone else. Who here has blamed your spouse for moving your car keys? We do it all the time, right? Yeah. So we do this, although, could be other reasons. So this could be communication that actually Maisie is trying to tell us something. So how do we change our behavior? Well, we can express concern for the lost wallet. You know, oh, gosh, I'm sorry you lost your wallet, Maisie. That's awful. I hate it when I lose things. You can offer to find it with her. Let's look for it. You can help her to find a safe place for it, even if you know this is going to keep happening, right? But you can see like the underlying parts of this is about kind of empathy, connection. It's like giving her the benefit of the doubt, giving her the power a little bit, rather than saying like, Maisie, you just put it over there, you know, or you didn't lose it, or, you know, whatever. And we do that naturally, and often out of frustration, often out of exhaustion as caregivers. But the ramifications of that is that the person with dementia then may not trust us, may become angry with us, may not come to us again, and may even become more paranoid because they're not sure how we're playing into this equation, you know? And so we can change our behavior. Maisie's been hiding her wallet, so what else could be going on? Well, she could have some unmet needs. She could be feeling like very insecure, you know? So this is like an emotional need that's not being met. And I think that this happens a lot, particularly in residential long-term care, like in memory care, that a person is not feeling secure in that environment. They're not feeling like this is my home, you know? They're not feeling like I belong here. And so when you're feeling like that, it's not unreasonable to kind of, you know, say like, some people are stealing from me, people are trying to harm me, you know, you're not feeling safe. And so there could be other reasons. So how do we change our behavior? Well, we might have to identify why else? Life story. So Maisie grew up with 8 sisters. She always had to hide her stuff. You know, so we can respond to the emotion again and be like, oh God, I'm so sorry you lost your wallet, you know? Let's see what we can do about it. Now, sometimes also, if this is something, none of this is working, and these things sometimes don't work. We try, they don't work. You can try other tactics. I mean, what you could say is something like, oh gosh, Maisie, I'm so sorry you lost your wallet, that's awful. I'm gonna help you find it, but before we do that, will you just hang out with me and have a cup of tea, because I need to take a minute. And it could be that in that minute with Maisie, that you're having tea with her, she forgets about the wallet. But the important part of that example was you responded to the emotional need first, you know, because it doesn't feel good if you're like, oh my God, I lost my wallet, I'm so upset, I lost my wallet, and you're like, let's have tea, you know. You know, that doesn't really help someone. It might actually get them upset because they're feeling like you're not listening to what they're saying at all. So looking at ourselves is another way that we can change our behavior. You know, looking in the mirror with love. And so we do have to ask ourselves, is our action, or is the person's action, really just a reaction to our poor behavior? You know, is what we're seeing a reaction to our poor behavior? Did we inadvertently do or say something that upset a person? Were we just not in the right headspace at that moment and we did something that caused that person to be really upset? I have many examples of this. I'm going to tell just a quick story. So I was in a senior living community and I was meeting with the executive director, and she was giving me a tour. And it was a memory care, and we walked past this gentleman, John, and let's call her Sue, the executive director, says to John, John, we had to get rid of your nail clippers, you know. And he went, what? Where are my nail clippers? And she said, well, we had to get rid of them because of what you did. And John said, what are my nail clippers? What are you talking about? And she said, because John, you were using them to open the screens to get out of your room. And John said, give me back my nail clippers. And she said, John, no, you can't have your nail clippers anymore. And she walks away. So I'm walking with her, oh gosh, how's this, you know, and he starts yelling after us, beep, beep, you know, bleeding out. It was a diatribe of curses towards her. And then we pass a nurse, and she says to the nurse, we need a psych consult. Was that John's fault? John forgot about the nail clippers. You know, it was her behavior that was causing John to act that way. Now, I don't know what she was thinking. Maybe she was thinking she was being transparent and helping John to remember that they confiscated his nail clippers, but it did not result in a good outcome. And it was an example to me of how sometimes we don't recognize the impact that we have and what we're saying to a person and how it could actually really be upsetting to them. So I'll just go back here. Here's another a quote from a gentleman named John Zeisel, who wrote a great book on Alzheimer's, and he talks about how aggression isn't really a disease symptom. It's actually a very normal human reaction. And it is often a reaction to feeling that a person's being aggressive to you. So again, we do have to kind of, I guess, have humility at times, even though it's very hard. I mean, I've been there, I've done things with people with dementia, made them very, very angry, and then I've had to sit with myself and go, okay, how can I avoid that in the future? Because in the moment, I was upset and I kind of upset this person, but maybe there's another way that I can approach this. Oops. Okay. The other way that we can change our behavior is actually to look at things from a different lens, this lens of well-being. And so rather than just focusing on how to prevent behaviors or respond to behaviors, keep behaviors from happening, it's like taking a step back and looking at how can we be proactive so that the person doesn't have to express to us in these ways what they need. So if their needs are totally met from a well-being perspective, they may not be showing us with their actions some of these things like aggression or apathy or frustration. So I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by this. So Al Power, who is a geriatrician who's written several excellent books on dementia, Dementia Beyond Drugs and Dementia Beyond Disease, came up with a well-being pyramid for people with dementia, talking about like basic human needs that we all have. So you can see this is more than like the typical Maslow hierarchy of needs, which is like food, water, sleep, all these different things. These are more like kind of deeper needs, but they're not any less important. These are needs that we all have as human beings. So his theory is that if we were to try harder at meeting these needs with people with dementia, we might not see some of the behaviors that we see because their needs would be met. So it's a very proactive approach. It's a different way of looking at things. So just to give a couple examples. So for example, identity is a basic human need. So when you are a person living with dementia, this is a need that sometimes is very compromised because you are confused. You're trying to make sense of yourself in the world. People are not treating you the same way that they used to. And so you may not have this need filled. You may not be feeling like I am my whole self. So we could proactively try to give people this need. And it's like small and big ways. This is where a lot of brainstorming comes in. It could be that you have a person with dementia that you're caring for, and they were a physician. And this is a big part of their identity. And so we might say to them as much as possible, Dr. Johnson, how are you doing today? Dr. Johnson, how are things going? Can you help me with this, Dr. Johnson? If you have a person with dementia that was a teacher, you might ask them about teaching. You might kind of take out that role that they've had and present it to them as a part of themselves. And so why is this important? Is because if people don't have a sense of identity, if they feel like that they are not known or seen, they are going to make themselves known. They're going to make themselves known. And there are many examples of this. One I can think of is there was a woman, I was in a nursing home, and anytime you walk by, she would go, help, 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 And what do you think people started doing? They started ignoring her. And so what I started realizing is the reason why she was doing that is because everyone was ignoring her. If people would just simply say, hi, Mrs. Johnson, and just talk about something about who she was, that would meet her need, and then she didn't feel the need to yell at us constantly because we were seeing her. We were paying attention to her. And I know the staff would say to me, that takes too much time. And I would say, well, it takes a lot more time actually to calm her down because she's yelling at everyone all day and being ignored. And then by the end of the day, when it's time for her to have dinner, she doesn't want anyone to be around her. And that takes a lot more time than people taking 3 seconds, right, and just acknowledging her. So how can we be proactive in our behaviors? You know, how can we ensure someone feels connected, that they feel like they are secure? And these higher level ones are hard to do, but how do people have a sense of meaning and purpose in their lives? You know, do we include them in things, even if they don't do it right? How do we ensure that people have joy, like little joyful moments? I mean, think about yourself and the little things on a daily basis that give you joy, the little things, right? I mean, for me, it's something like a good cup of coffee, you know, petting my dog. You know, how do we ensure that people's days are more filled with those things? And it's kind of like a prevention then, you know, to the other things that might be frustrating each day. Because I'm a lot happier when I have my coffee and my glass of wine at the end of the day, and I have, you know, all these things. I'm a lot happier. So the other stuff kind of is not as much forefront. Okay, so getting a little more academic-y again, but I think, again, this is really interesting information that, again, I don't think most of the time that we do a very good job of getting out to people. So what is the antidote to malignant social psychology? So we talked about that, right? All these things that we inadvertently do to people with dementia because we think that's the best way to care for them. It's called positive person work. And it's the opposite of that. So it's the things that we actively try to do with people with dementia to make them feel like they count, you know, that they matter, they're here. So it's not focusing on their deficits, you know, it's focusing on who they are and what they can still do. So it's stuff like recognizing them as a fellow human being, talking to them like you normally would anybody else. It's negotiating with them, consulting with them, you know, asking them what they think about something, asking them to help you with something, bringing them in, you know, moving towards collaboration, doing things with them rather than just for people. So even if you are helping someone bathe, you know, what are the ways in which you can collaborate with the person? Sometimes as simple as the person holding the washcloth, you know, holding the thing of soap. Having them be a part of the process so they don't feel like it's just being done to them. You know, and we don't always have a good sense of whether we're going too fast, too slow, is the person able to be a part of this? So if we collaborate with them, it gives them more power, it allows them to be a part of that. Play. Temulation, which is basically focusing on the senses. So how do we, if a person has trouble with words, you know, how else do we communicate with someone? Maybe it is through touch, maybe it's through music. Maybe it's through seeing things. There's lots of great things out there actually that we can use, you know, to connect with people with dementia and to focus on these things that they still can do. Many of you may have seen years ago there was a video that came out from Music and Memory, which is a project that was created by a gentleman, Dan Cohen, and there's a little video about Henry and when he puts on his earphones, how he comes alive. If you haven't seen it, I would look it up. And so people with dementia can listen to music and come alive, right? It's something that they can do to feel good. So what can we do to help people feel good? Celebrating, you know, having joy, and relaxation. I think for a while in memory care and with people with dementia, we had this misconception that we had to keep people with dementia busy all the time. And sometimes like I'd go into memory care and it'd be like a schedule of every 5 minutes having someone do something. Heard of the validation method, or it's Naomi Fell came up with this, which is when you're talking to someone with dementia, your goal is to always validate their experience. You know, so no matter what they say to you, it's okay. You validate that. You know, if they say, I'm so hungry, and meanwhile the person maybe just had lunch. So what we wouldn't want to say is, you just had lunch, right? Because we know where that goes. It's like a circular argument that, you know, doesn't really end. What we could say is, oh, you're hungry? What is your favorite thing to eat? I hate it when I'm hungry. You could talk about something, validate what they're saying, right? Rather than try and correct them and tell them that they're wrong about their experience. Holding is promoting security. It could be a physical, it could be a hug, it could be holding hands, it could be sitting with someone. Lots of different ways in which we can create security for people so that they feel safe. And just facilitation, enabling people to do things. So focusing on their strengths. So maybe a person can't do all of the dish putting away, but is there a part of that they can do, especially if you facilitate it? I mean, I've had people with dementia, their families put like stickies on the cabinets that are like plates, cups, and then they just guide them. Okay, that's where the plates go. So enabling them to be a part of it so that they feel that they have a sense of purpose. So this is from Dr. Steve Sabat, and he talks about some other ways in which we can support people with dementia, ways that we can change our behavior. So I love this. It's such an interesting, I love his language. He talks about taking the intentional stance towards the person with dementia. So what does this mean? It means that when you're with a person living with dementia, you assume that what they're trying to tell you is important and real and makes sense. So you are sitting there with the person, you're listening to what they're saying, even if it is not clear. But you're assuming there's something that this person is trying to tell you. And your job is to try to get it out of them, right? Your job is to try to interpret it so that you can try to understand what they're trying to say. So the mantra is kind of like, the person's not confused, I'm confused. So how do I become less confused? How do I try to understand this? And so behind this is an assumption that that person has something to say, that they have thoughts and feelings that are valid, that what they're going to tell you is important. And I don't know about you, but I've had lots of people with dementia tell me things that are profound. That, if you give people the space to be able to say things, you will learn a lot from people with dementia. Actively listening. So we hear about this in our own lives all the time, right, of what it means to be an active listener. And so with people with dementia, how do we be active? And I totally understand how this is difficult in reality because we don't always have the luxury of tons of time, to sit down with somebody who has dementia, especially if they're wanting to tell us stories and maybe they're telling us the same stories over and over again. But sometimes it's just the act of really paying attention to someone for a short period of time that is enough. And what do we mean by active listening? It means you're sitting with someone, limiting distractions, focusing on the person, really paying attention to what they're doing, not focusing on other things. And this is really important with people with dementia, not just for relationship, but people with dementia really have difficulty with distractions, So if I'm doing dishes and my mother-in-law is trying to tell me a story and I'm like, okay, I'll be right there. I'm doing dishes, I'm walking, let me go put these dishes away. Yeah, keep telling me that story about the dog, that's really interesting. She's gonna feel that her story is not interesting. And actually, just the act of sitting there with her for 5 minutes can give her a sense that this is important. And she might even tell me something beyond the dog that's important for me to know. And so really paying attention to people. And then also, it's okay to say things like, I'm having trouble understanding what you're trying to tell me. Can you help me understand? Sometimes that's by writing things or drawing things. Sometimes it's show me. There was a person with dementia that would say to me, can you help me find the book? I need to find the book. And I didn't know what the book was. And I thought, okay, can you show me what it is you're looking for? And he would bring me over to his bookcase. And he was looking for a particular book. So he could show me, he just couldn't come up with the correct word. And then there's using indirect repair. So indirect repair, okay, so this is like a very academic-y kind of speak, but direct repair is like if we're talking to someone and then we correct them. They say to us, no, you have to, make a right onto, this road. And we go, no, that's not right. You actually do this. Or if someone says something incorrect and we just basically correct them and say that's not the right word or that's not the right way of thinking about it. Indirect repair is actually kind of offering a guess to what the person is saying, but really it's kind of honoring that this person is telling us something important, and we're again kind of assuming that they have something to say. It might not be entirely accurate. And so we're saying things like, I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. So let me see if I do. And then you paraphrase. And you might say, okay, so you're telling me about, you know, this shirt that you put somewhere and you're not really sure where it is. No, that's not what I mean. You know, the person might tell you. So when you can reflect back what you think they're saying, actually that can help them to communicate to you what they're trying to say. So it's not correcting them, it's really trying to say, like, I'm not sure I'm understanding, but let me try. Is this what you're saying to me? Are you hungry? You know, do you want to go for a walk? You know, this is what I'm trying to understand. And so you're kind of trying to help the person fill in the blanks, but you're also asking them if you're accurate. And so sometimes when people, especially in their earlier experiences of dementia, they don't mind if you correct them, and you can even have this conversation with them. I've encouraged, especially couples, to sometimes do this. You know, you're at a church event and the person calls someone by the wrong name, and they may give their wife permission to correct them. They might say, I'm going to call people by the wrong name, tell me that's wrong because I don't want to be embarrassed. For other people with dementia, especially as they progress, this might be very upsetting if someone's correcting them all the time. So you kind of have to know the person, you have to know where they are, and your relationship is a big part of this. And providing a non-anxious presence. So this is hard for someone like me that probably doesn't do this naturally. So I have to slow down a bit sometimes and try just to be very calm, you know, when I'm sitting with a person with dementia. So what does that look like? Again, you're kind of paying attention to the person, right? You're sitting with them, you're limiting distractions. You might even be attentive to noise and other things around. One of the things that I see a lot, especially in senior living, is that there are lots of events and programs that are in very loud rooms. And so the person with dementia gets very anxious and then they walk away. And then we say, why is the person leaving? And it's because it's too much. It's like, it's an anxious presence, you know? The person just has to get out of the situation. So we can create that too, or not create it. And we can try to be calm in different ways and at least look like, you know, we're accepting what the person's saying. So we're now here, again, to remind us of this, is that, you know, some of this is hard to hear, right? Because we think back and we go, oh God, I didn't do that right. That was not a good thing, right? I shouldn't have said that, I shouldn't have done that. I know I do that. But the good thing about this, and what I think is this is the bright spot, is that this is stuff that we can change. We can change our behavior. We can act differently, you know? And this is actually like enabling us to be our best selves. I mean, this is what we naturally, I think, want to do. This is what we naturally want to do with each other. We want to connect. We want to laugh with people. We want to be with them. I think sometimes when we become caregivers, we sort of think, we can't do that anymore. We have a job now. You know, our job is to, you know, keep this person under control. You know, our job is to keep them straight, right? You know, but the positive is that we can control that. We can do these good things. You know, we can sit with the people. We can have a good relationship with them. We can build trust. We can use our empathy. We can use the way that we have these relationships with people and continue that. We can have versions of the same relationship with people. And so we have the power. So we each one of us have the power. You know, we have the power to change our behavior. We can't necessarily control the behavior of a person with dementia, or really anybody, but we can change our behavior and think about things differently and act differently towards people. And so, you know, think about what's best about yourselves. You know, think about your gifts and your strengths and what you can bring to people with dementia that you can use to help them to live well and to really adapt and cope with living with dementia in the best way that they can. And it's going to help you too. You know, it's going to make it a more positive experience for you with a very, very, very difficult condition, right? That changes so many things for all of us. But this is a bright spot that we can have some control over. So I hope that we can think about it that way. So I'm going to pause and ask if anyone has questions or comments. We have, I think, a few minutes left. Or if there's anything else you want me to talk more about, I'm happy to. Is it okay if I bring the mic over so people can hear?
Usually everybody goes here, me.
Okay.
I'd like to say one thing about the environments you were talking about, and giving a patient a back, particularly women. Make sure where you are dressing them and that the bathroom itself is very warm, so that they don't get cold. To me, that is like the number one, no, I don't want a back. And they won't say because I'm getting too cold and things like that. So if you just preheat your back, then you put a little heating.
It's such a great point because I don't like taking a shower in a cold bathroom. In fact, I probably resist that. I'm going to come to you after I'm here.
What kind of response have you received from nursing homes and in terms of this education?
Great question. Okay, so I work with a range of nursing homes and senior living communities, and I would say, on one hand, this resonates so deeply with people because this is the way people want to care for people. You know, it's mistrust, and I have no way of proving this, but I do believe that people know on some level that someone has died, you know, that they just cannot recall the details. It's kind of blurry to them. And so it's not that we want to remind them of that or to bring it back up, but I don't think we also should pretend like it didn't happen. So it can be a very complicated situation, but I would say sometimes you can ask yourself the why, right? So why is this person asking about, you know, their spouse, their sister, whomever it is that they're asking about that passed away? Maybe something reminded them of that person, you know, that they were walking by, they were thinking about something came into their head. Could be that they missed that person, and that's what they're trying to tell you, is that they missed that person. So it could be an opportunity to talk about the person. It could be an opportunity to just like kind of mourn the person without saying they're dead, you know, and to just be like, oh, I bet you missed Sandy. You're not saying Sandy died, you're just saying I bet you missed Sandy. You know, that's awful. It's so hard when she's not here. So many, I know, different ways, but hopefully that's a little helpful. Any other? Yes, time to go. I'm getting the, thanks for the questions. That's wonderful. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all. My info is on the slides, and I have info over there. So certainly anyone feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer questions or to talk more. So thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Ellen.